Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the DEI Dispatch. With this podcast, we're trying to explore the frontiers of blockchain and crypto. AI is bringing both immense hope and fear amongst people, and a lot of formidable folks in industry and in academia have spoken about the concerns around AI and eventually AGI. And so, crypto and blockchain led decentralized technologies have emerged as a solution to this. And to talk more about this, I have with me David Minarsh. A quick introduction to David. While I was researching about him, I was dumbfounded by the level of work that he has done. He holds a PhD in applied game theory from University of Oxford. He has founded 4 companies before. He's a serial entrepreneur, and so he also created the first multi-agentic system compatible with the blockchains. And so we're going to explore the frontiers of DEI with him. But first, welcome, David. How are you feeling?
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, feeling good.
So, David, let's begin with your childhood first. Why don't you walk us through your childhood? How was it like? And what got you interested in maths and science? Or were you like interested in maths and science from the very beginning? Or were there some outer, like inspiration or, factors that led you to choose career in academics?
Yeah, great question. So I got into maths pretty early on, I mean, in school, basically. And um, actually, I don't remember like a lot of the details. I was always just very much into it. I actually wanted to become an architect at some point, was very much into anything structural and like anything like planning and details. So all that happened, and then when I finished school, I actually decided to do maths because it felt like it left me the most options for things in the future, and so that's what I went for.
Hmm. You're a rare combination, I would say, of an academic and an entrepreneur. And usually, we are a lot of who we are today is in some way, shape, or form influenced by our past, usually our childhood. And so, were there like role models growing up? Like, were like folks in your family academically inclined, or were they entrepreneurial in and around you? Or did you have some heroes that inspired you to kind of take up the work that you do today?
Great question. I mean, for me, in the family, there was definitely an entrepreneur. So my uncle, he's been very entrepreneurial. Actually, I would often sit in his office, even when I was like still in preschool and school, and kind of read his investment prospectus and other kind of things. He was like running a fund and a game studio and various other things, and kind of really got into the details there, um, and loved all that sort of world, which obviously in school wasn't covered at all, and none of my friends had exposure to it. And still remember having like dinners at points with like people from Atari, and which was like all the craze back then. Obviously, me just being a child and just sitting along and with big eyes. So there was all these impressions, and then later, I think it opened my eyes to, or like just kind of put that out as an option. I think what generally that's my hypothesis. A lot of people are constrained by what they can imagine, right? And so I could imagine entrepreneurship because I saw it in my family, and I saw the good parts of it, but also like all the bad parts of it for sure.
So I'm also curious about your PhD in game theory. What was that like? Like, are you still using knowledge from there in the current startups, or like in the previous startups that you did?
Yeah, 100%. I think what helps there a lot is like both with maths, like as I said, the reason for maths was it's sufficiently abstract. You don't get boggled down in the details of like something too specific, and then like
Yeah.
sort of um, uh, like too early in life, basically. And similar with the PhD, the reason why I wanted to do it was like one intellectual pursuit and sort of just the curiosity of it all. But then the other part was it just felt generally abstract enough to be applicable to a lot of things. I still was like playing with the idea, should I go maybe more in like business consulting, like strategic consulting, which lots of people did back then, or more in investment banking. But then it became pretty clear as I was going through my PhD that tech would be sort of the area I would ultimately settle on. And I think like the nice thing there is that a lot of the things I did in the PhD help me today think about problems, structure them. Like game theory as a subject is very broad, very narrow, depending how you define it, and you can like apply it to a lot of business problems, strategic things, and like crypto is full of game theory. Basically, there's a lot of mechanisms and games people need to study and understand.
When with academics, it's a very differentiated skill set when somebody goes in to do that. And now applying, like basically turning those ideas into products and services and solutions is what a business is all about. And that's not always easy. So my question to you is like, how did you do it? What skills did you realize you needed to develop in order to turn from being an academic to now becoming an entrepreneur? And what was that like?
Yeah. So for me, like a lot of these things happen after the fact. So like you study, and then later you find out that some of those things are applicable.
But now that you look back and try to connect the dot, do you feel like it was a natural progression for you, or was it more like search and discover, and then you just stumbled upon it and okay, this is what
Yeah,
I
definitely.
want
I
to do.
mean, like, definitely. I mean, at various points, I'm very entrepreneurial from the beginning, and I was always keen to create like impact where it's not just monetary, but like where you actually feel like people have a better life, better outcomes from using whatever you're using. And one of the parts of academia which I didn't like was that I felt the impact was just a bit low. Unless you like in a few narrow cases, I think like the research doesn't really move that many people's lives, and often in a very hidden way, maybe. Um, so yeah, that's not to like say academia doesn't have value or anything. It's just different than I think in a lot of the tech side. So I was curious to do that, and after PhD, I initially worked very much on sort of things related to governance and voting. So there were a couple of startups I tried in that area, then moved more towards scoping that down to people management. So we actually had some very successful trials with one of my startups with like MPs, where we offered them like software, like MPs, members of parliament in the UK House of Commons, who could like use our software to get like very deep insights about their like constituency based on like narrow like polling data, which was sort of mapped with statistical methods into their constituency. It was very interesting, and actually like we had a good product market fit, but the market was too small. Then moved more into sort of team measurement where the market was big, but at the time, personal like the whole HR tech sector didn't really have a good time. And then I moved on from there, and both of them had like ingredients of what I liked a lot. I think the first one very clearly affected a lot of people, right? If you can make a difference for people's like democratic participation, that really can move the needle a lot. If you can help people, work more like better together, put simply, that can move the needle. Although what I never quite liked about that part was it's HR is, for better or worse, has like some things which are not like up my alley. And in terms of like, I guess like the general vibe of it. And then like, after that, I gave myself some time, and I always found like crypto very interesting. I hadn't really worked in it much. And I also obviously loved game theory. I loved sort of machine learning AI at that point, because I'd done it for a better part since I left academia. And so one thing which I found quite fascinating was this idea of agents and at the time there was this startup in Cambridge called Fetch AI. They still exist. It's probably one of the OG crypto AI protocols, and they were looking for someone to build their agent frameworks. And so I joined them early 2019, so almost 6 years ago, and then for 2 years built up all their agent frameworks. And that was really at this intersection of my skills, and I think that's also why that stuck with me, because I then sort of really developed a passion into software agents from there onwards.
That's a pretty interesting journey, David. I see a lot of resilience, like you were failing in different startups and then trying again, getting back up. So that was pretty interesting. So yeah, so you learned about AI during your after the second startup, third startup, right? Like
So yeah, I mean, I had done this since the PhD. So throughout, the sometimes more on the statistical side, more on the data science side, sometimes more machine learning, and then sort of over time it moved towards more agents.
Before diving into AI agents, I want to kind of step back and talk more about AI first. That's the foundation. So, two questions. First, when did you first come across AI? And when you did, what did you think about it? Like, I mean, media touts it as the seminal technology of our times. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. I don't know. What were your first thoughts when you came across AI as a technology? And how do you think it will impact us as society, as our in our economy, and as for us as individual humans?
Yeah, I mean, when I got into it more, so initially when I got exposed to it, people were just like, well, it's just a fancier word for basic statistics. What people did in like economics and econometrics or in statistics with like linear regressions and stuff. But obviously it kind of, neural net at their core, like the mathematical operations are extremely trivial. But then obviously once you stack this, it becomes much more interesting. And what I found initially was that this was still pretty like a tech subject, right? Like when in in the 2010s to 20s, like when I went through this journey, which we outlined, people would be talking about this would be like professionals in various industries. It was like occasionally there was some sort of hype around AI, but maybe when like this reinforcement learning from DeepMind came with like, the alpha versions of their AlphaGo and their other products, which kind of played games very well, that got attention. But then again, like general public didn't really care, right? And so like
And how long back was that?
so for instance 2013, 14, 15, all the way till like I think even 2020, right? Like I think like this real change in like how people talk about AI is really just since ChatGPT, I would say. Like because that obviously is a qualitative big shift in terms of the kind of products and applications you can build and also the technology itself. But what, yeah, to just close my thought there, like for instance, I was working on like at a tech startup where we were like kind of trying to use natural language processing and like other forms, other algorithms to improve like aspects of the product. So like that's all AI, but like from an end user, you wouldn't like describe it as quote unquote AI. It's just like part of the product, right? The end user wouldn't even necessarily think of it as a product with AI in it. And I think that was like a lot of the journey throughout the last decade. And then I think agents, it's also interesting because agents is a field, like a part, like if you Google Wikipedia's definition of AI, like AI, like agents as a whole field is part of it, like multi-agent systems as well. So and multi-agent systems has been around for decades, like the 50s or even earlier, and like depending how you look at it. So it's not like all these things are super new. It's just that like qualitatively these things change over time, right? So I think like what's really changed recently is like people experience things like ChatGPT and its capabilities. People on the technical side experience like what you can build with these large language models, which is qualitatively very different than what you could do before. People experience things like Sora and other image generation and video generation techniques and are blown away, right? And then like you have things like the self-driving cars that now actually are more or less self-driving, right? In the case of Waymo, like fully self-driving, or in the case of Tesla, like you're really getting there. And so like that's very recent, right? So like there's this real shift in the kind of products people experience, which is exciting. And I think with agents, they've been around for a long time, but what's happening there is that there's also these different episodes, like where you can almost sort of play a historian and say, in that phase, it was sort of this kind of agents, and now we're in this phase, and so on. So we can dive into that.
Yeah. Uh, I would like to ask one interesting question to you, which is what do you think is the ultimate goal of AI? Like, why humanity, like why us are, building AI?
That's interesting question, and like it's a good question, and also like in a sense, like I find like kind of gets at one of the problems with the term. It's like, what do you even mean, right? Like, because like it's such a broad term, like what we mean by AI. I mean, are we talking about a specific kind of algorithm, or are we talking about like a
Yeah.
concept like AI that becomes like AGI, like general intelligence, and then super intelligence, or like, right? There's so many like, and then there's definitions of these terms. I think like, some people clearly just work in the space for money, and then others, and kind of now that it's like a hot space, are very attracted by it, right? And then others work in the space for intellectual pursuit and like this idea of creating like algorithms that can compete with human intelligence and then kind of go beyond it. And then, yet others just want to build great products. And then obviously there's overlap between those folks. And I'm sure there's other kind of reasons why people get drawn to it. I think as a whole, it's just like the story of humans, right? Like it's another tool we're building. It's only that maybe this particular tool is getting pretty massive. Like it's, like some people, like when they talk about the risks of like AI, often will like bring analogies to like nuclear or other kind of technologies. And obviously they're not like analogous in the sense of like what works there works here, but like they're all pretty impactful technologies. Like, as one has like very powerful agentic AI, one could imagine a number of like very dangerous scenarios for humans. But like I tend to not want to talk too much about it because it becomes a lot about like hypotheticals and like definitions and how this all plays out. So I feel like today what's exciting is that there is like real new technology, like with real new capabilities. That means we can build like very interesting products today that we couldn't build like a while ago, and these products can actually like meaningfully impact a lot of people's lives, and sometimes very positively and also very negatively. And so I think rather than wanting to get carried away with like more like futuristic scenarios around AI, I think like it's very important to even like discuss today's capabilities and what impact they have on humans. So maybe we can do that.
Yeah, I feel like humans throughout all the ages like have tried to, like innovation and everything that's happening is because in pursuit of freeing up our time so that we can do other stuff. So yeah, whether it was Industrial Revolution or before that, whether it was, like discovering fire. So everything was freeing. I mean, our food habits changed from eating raw food to, now eating agricultural, like grown up food. So yeah, I mean, I feel like AI is just humanity's pursuit towards freeing up more of our time. But we'll see where it takes us.
Right. And every tool, like, right, it can be wielded in different ways. Like if you think about agriculture, right? Like the route there took us via feudalism, right? And that's a real root here with AI as well. I think like we have a very powerful new tool, and if it's used and concentration gets too centralized, then that really shifts like how society works. Because you have these like you can see this already. I mean, ChatGPT actually is like case in point in terms of a product. Like a person with, I mean, I don't have the studies at hand, but I sort of remember coming across them, like, and I can see it sort of on my team even, like there is a correlation between a person's own like means and capabilities and intelligence, I guess, and its use of those technologies. So like it's not evenly distributed. It's not just about access. I can give access to this technology to some people, they don't know what to do with it, and I can give access to this technology to someone else, and they'll 10x or maybe even 100x their output, and their ability to be economically like participating in society. And that has massive implications, right? Because then you can have like this idea of like a one person running a unicorn, which maybe is a thing, maybe not quite, but doesn't really matter. It's very clear that like one person can do a lot more with this tool. And so if we only focus around access, well, we're still not necessarily having like outcomes which are particularly stable. Like if you think from a societal point of view, right? Like a lot of us obviously want to strive for like our own success and like betterment and so on, and like also have an impact on society. But a lot of these things are rooted some or connected somehow in a certain level of stability around us. Like if everything changes, if the entire like game changes, it becomes very hard to see how your effort can translate into winning, quote unquote, right? So like a lot of people, even like very ambitious people, I think sort of implicitly assume that there's a lot of stability in some factors around society. And when what we're doing, I think, with AI, or what's happening with this, is that it's such a revolutionary technology that it could lead to a lot of shifts in how like economic competition plays out. And then that has implications on a political level, right? Like how easy it becomes for people to rally, but also how easy it becomes for like certain people in powers to prevent others to do what I guess they want. So I'm just very, I guess, like I'm very unsure what the societal level impact of this technology is. I think it's too early to tell, and it's like really important for us to be aware. And like the way I'm conquering it is, and like my team, is by basically saying, okay, well, it probably doesn't hurt if everyone has not just access, but also like the ability to have good agents that do valuable things for them. Why? Because, well, firstly, the access part is important. Like if obviously I need to rent my agents from somewhere, then I'm continuously kind of a slave to who I'm renting the agents from, right? Like be it some sort of payment plan, like with some Web2 giant or similar. And then the other part is, okay, well, once I have my agents, can I put them to use, and can they be useful to me, and what does that even mean, right? And so that means you need a lot of different types of agents for different people's needs and their circumstances. And so that's sort of the high level, like, I guess, philosophical angle we're taking with Olas and all the work we're doing. We want to give people like agents that they can fully own, and that they ultimately are like capable to do tasks in a varied domains, and domains we as creator might not even know about today.
Big tech is pumping like billions of dollars in developing AI. I'm curious, what's your take on centralized AI? Because then I'm gonna move into decentralized AI into Olas Network more and more. But like billions of dollars is going in. I think OpenAI is now currently valued at $157 billion. Last night I was checking, Perplexity is close to $40 billion now, if I'm not wrong. And so, how does that space influence and impact Olas and decentralized AI? But before that, like, how do you see the entire centralized AI space at its current juncture?
So, I mean, currently decentralized AI couldn't do without centralized AI, because that's also naturally how you go about like decentralization. It's progressively starts somewhere, right? Like you have some team or someone ships something, and practically all the good models, like at least historically, have been in a centralized context. Now it's getting interesting because obviously we had this sort of semi decentralized setup with something like Llama, where you have like the training happen centrally, and then like the model can be used by everyone, and is permissively licensed. And now it gets even more interesting. I think there was this DeepSeek announcement the other day. They have a very capable model which didn't take much training at all, like in terms of like relative, in a relative sense to other similar capable models, didn't take much money at all to train. So things are making progress there. On the other hand, you have things like OpenAI has entirely new architectures with their O series of models. So I think this kind of competition will play out, and it's a good thing. I think a lot of this investment, from the knowledge I have about the space, and I'm pretty peripheral to it, is that generally like there's a lot of betting going on, right? And like I think Mark Zuckerberg even said, like, it's infrastructure build out, like you kind of got to do it, and then you'll see where we land, sort of thing. But so yeah, I mean, I'm sure there will be some winners and a lot of losers as well. And I think where this connects with decentralized AI, it's still not sure. It's still not clear how this will play out, right? So there's this idea of decentralized AI, but then what does this even mean? Like, there's different ways to define it. It could mean that the original like software, be it the models or the software around it, the systems or everything, gets created in a centralized way and then used by the user at the edge in a maybe open source context. There's also this idea that even the model training maybe happens in a decentralized context, where different nodes operated by different people collectively train a model, and then there's and this has happened already, right, on a smaller scale. Like, there's projects like Prime Intellect or Jensen who are pursuing this. We as Olas participated in a training run with Prime Intellect. They created a fine model. I mean, it's still much smaller than, and in capabilities much worse than some of the larger models, but it's a good first step. And then there's this is just training. Then you come to the time when you're running the software, right? So if it's just a model, like it's purely inference, as we call it, or if you then think about like an agent, right? An agent is a model plus some software around it. Like, where does that run? Is it like on like a server which someone else operates for you, or is it on your device, like the edge, quote unquote, or is it like maybe a distributed network where you're like sort of doing it like a blockchain in a sense, where the nodes are distributed and then the agent is sort of the collection of all the nodes? That's something Olas also enables. And like a lot of the answers here depend on the use case. So you can't sort of say the one thing will happen, because that depends on the use case, right? If I like some use cases, you have to have like the inference happen at the edge, because you don't even have time to like bring all the data, let's say, to some centralized place and then make that decision, or it's just not economically viable maybe. Other use cases simply makes no sense to do it at the user, and kind of the only way to do it is in a more centralized way. So I think one has to be pragmatic, and like the role of crypto and AI is to sort of find the niches that make a lot of sense for the trade-offs that any particular crypto and AI solution like picks, and really everyone has to pick some trade-off in the same way that you do that in Web 2, right? It's not like a golden bullet.
Why do you think like all the big companies like Meta, etc., they aren't experimenting with DAI, decentralized AI?
Why they're not doing? I think like Meta is, right? Or did you say why are they?
I mean, why aren't they?
Oh,
Um,
I mean, I
so,
would say Meta
like
is, right?
OpenAI,
I
Oh,
OpenAI
mean,
is,
Llama is still open source, but open source
right,
is
right.
not the
yeah.
same as decentralized yet.
Yeah, and like that, for instance, what's not open source there is like the model like training process, whereas for instance, someone like Prime Intellect, they do everything like the weights, the training algorithm, the actual model. And so yeah, I mean, it really like why do the more centralized players not do it? It's business reasons, right? Like everyone has a different business model, and I think like there's a lot of talk about like regulatory or ethical reasons which people kind of put in front of that, but at the end of the day, that would be the first large scale companies that don't do it for business reasons. So I'm sure it's for business reasons in all cases, with different window dressing tactics. And I mean, from
But
a
David, don't you think like at the end of the day, somebody who will build a more commercially viable product will be able to gain market traction? And so if we're not doing that and they have that economies of scale advantage, won't centralized AI always win over decentralized alternatives?
I don't think it's as simple. I think basically I think what happens in crypto is like we have I mean, you can see this in any hype cycle. People like get carried away about every single thing, and it's a part of it is also like for I guess like the part of the audience that wants to educate themselves. Part of it is just because there's backholders who shill certain things, right? And then for those who are doing the shelling, they're often like not being fully honest, maybe, or just sort of pushing the envelope a bit beyond what is maybe happening, or they're just very bullish. I think I'm 100% sure we won't have a situation where suddenly all of AI is decentralized. I don't think that will ever happen. But I do think that we'll have much more of a spectrum. And like there's different ways to think about decentralized AI. As I say, like there's this idea where you have some sort of network, like a blockchain, where you have some shared state, or like compute happens in some sort of shared context. But then there's also this idea of decentralization that the three of us live here. We're three independent entities. Like,
Yeah.
we're monoliths in a software sense, that I live here and like I'm this Bioware, you this Bioware, and this Bioware. But then like you could imagine like there being three software agents that kind of replace us, and that's a form of decentralization, right? Each of them is independent. And so from that point of view, right, like OpenAI is an agent in this AI economy, and then its employees are and its models are currently still controlled by OpenAI. Maybe one day they become a bit more independent. We'll see. But so in that sense, I think this is getting very philosophical. But in that sense, I think we'll always have a spectrum. And then like if you think about the products, it's the same thing. So if you have certain use cases where it makes sense to think about like decentralization, right? So let's come with some concrete examples. So let's say you have a DeFi use case where you want to have something like a vault logic where multiple people like deposits their funds into it, like something like a Yearn or like an Aave or something, but it has like logic that's much more advanced than what you could do on chain currently, right? Then you could imagine you have something like what Visa does, for instance, where you have like some off-chain like ML pipeline, basically machine learning pipeline or AI algorithm that you utilize in making like decisions upon this sort of pool of assets. And so in that case, it's very interesting to think about and sort of important to think about the decentralization of this, because you don't want to trust one guy to run this algorithm correctly, right? So here we have a different, like, definitive use case for either like decentralized inference networks or some sort of CKML approach, right? Different ways of verifying that no single entity can sort of control that algorithm, that it has a degree of like decentralization when we're running the algorithm. But then you can also look at use cases like we have in Olas, where the agent is much like a wallet for the user. So like you have your MetaMask, all of us and various other wallets on our browsers. We have this app called Pearl, and a user can download Pearl and then fund it. And so inside Pearl is a user's single agent, soon multiple agents that work on behalf of the user and its wallet. In that case, you also have decentralization, but it takes a different form. So here it's like each user has their own agent, but these agents run on a centralized substrate, your computer, right? But the whole system is decentralized because everyone has a different agent. And I don't control your agent, you don't control mine, right? So that's a different quality of decentralization, and it lends itself to a different use case, which is that of a sort of smart wallet. So I think depending on the application, like the form of decentralized AI is very different. And then if you want to contrast that with centralized, so let's say we have a model where the inference ultimately is consumed maybe by me, and I'm fine trusting OpenAI because I think by and large they're doing a fine job. Well, then that's a very valid reason for me to use OpenAI over some probably more expensive and worse functioning decentralized algorithm, right? So that's one part. And then I think one is network effects, right? Like one part of the discussion is network effects. So like how can we leverage network effects? I think like one benefits crypto and AI has is that like with these on-chain mechanisms, like smart contracts are the means why we do this, but like basically defining certain like things on chain that incentivize peoples and other actors like software agents to do certain things, we have a leg up over coordinating large crowds, right? Like we've seen this, like people coordinate around all sorts of things in crypto, be it like very solid things like some DeFi primitives all the way to some random meme coin, right? And I think that's a very powerful tool, which I'm sure we'll see play out more in crypto AI. I mean, we've seen it a little, and Olas is using it heavily, and others are using it heavily. But there's a way room up to kind of leverage this around the concept of collecting data from users, right? To build like maybe things like data DAOs. There's a couple of projects doing that, or to use token mechanisms to incentives to coordinate training for people to contribute software like Olas does, for people to contribute agents, valuable contributions like Olas does, all these kind of things crypto enables. And it'll be interesting to see whether some of those can take on more centralized platforms. I mean, right now the strongest data flywheels are with centralized platforms. So I think it would be silly to say that by default we'll win, but I can see like a way of this playing out where this might change.
Yeah, this is a good segue to actually talk about AI agents. You brought up
Agents.
so many different ideas around what AI agents are capable of, but foundationally, how I see them different from a ChatGPT, which is more of an AI assistant for me because I have to sit there and continuously prompt it, instruct it to do something, and then it will do for me. And I see like foundationally an AI agent, quote unquote, will be autonomous, meaning it will be able to take action. I would, I mean, in the ideal world, it would be so advanced that it's capable of understanding what I need and preempt my desires and execute. Right. So I want to just start to. So we're all understanding the same thing. I want you to define what an AI agent is, and are there different kinds of AI agents? I also saw a mention of these AEAs or autonomous economic agents. Are they a subtype of AI agents? So are we talking about different things here? If you can just bring this all into one context, and then we'll roll it to Olas Network.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely like a lot of different definitions of this term, and a lot of people use it in a different context, and that's okay because it's basically I see like AI agents or agents, software agents are to the AI epoch what apps are to what we had with like the mobile and Web 2.0, like read and write, and then like what sites were to Web 1, where you just kind of everyone had a website and put up some info. So it's like this is also kind of preempts like another point, which I think is like there won't be some sort of one agent player that wins or something. That's totally ludicrous, because it's such a broad technology that finds application in so many different ways. So how can we, classify it? Well, I think one way to think about is like the level of interaction versus autonomy, like user interaction with the agent versus full autonomy that agent has. And that's one dimension. And then the other one is how user owned it is versus how like effectively rented it is, because you're just borrowing it from some centralized platform. And like, for instance, Ola sits at the very user and autonomous end of the spectrum, user owned and autonomous end of the spectrum. ChatGPT right now, like if you use the O1 model, right, like it does some sort of level of thinking, tools use, and so on. So this is a very, very valid like way of describing an agent, but it isn't like autonomous for long periods of time, right? Like you give it a prompt, it'll like have a certain degree of autonomy within the context of that prompt to kind of basically find you an answer, but it won't sort of keep running when you then go away, right? It'll be idle. Whereas you have other, so I call this kind of technology more in the sort of interaction side of the square, because you basically, it only acts as an agent when you prompt it, and then it's idle again. And there's cool things you can build in Web3 there as well, like things like prompt your transaction, basically. Like you give it an intent, and it'll maybe like come up with a bunch of transaction objects, you review them and sign them, right? There's a couple of people building this, and it's probably fine to call this an AI agent too, because for a short period of time, the system takes in like an observation from its environment, then kind of translates that goal into some output, which it gives back to its user. But I think where it gets very interesting for people is when these systems are pretty autonomous. They have a couple of qualities. Like first, to be autonomous, it needs to run for longer periods of time, because usually like you need to be able to make free choices and take actions. And if I can't even run, then I can't really do that. So I think one thing is like a long running system, right? Which isn't just on for a few seconds. And then the term autonomy itself is actually, I like it, and I also find it so confusing myself. It's very broad again, right? So you can have like the kind of autonomy you and I have, which is we go through life, we take action independently of someone else, but then we also update like what we even see as our goals all the time. So it's not even like we had some initial creator gave us a goal, and then within that goal we're autonomous. No, we're also changing what our goal is, and it's a sort of continuous like evolution, and that's a very valid to call this autonomous. But then like what most people talk today when they talk about autonomous agents, they mostly talk about products which are actually quite confined in their goals. So you as a user give the product a goal, like maybe trade my wallet, or find me someone to go on a date with, or research this topic for me forever and just keep me updated as new things come up. Like, I don't want any of these systems as a user of that product to suddenly start deciding that actually they want to now become a student of mathematics or philosophy because that's their higher aim, right? Or start trading meme coins because that's what they're into now. Like, this would be a failure of a product. Would I still call these systems autonomous? Yes, because they basically still use tools towards a goal which was given to them independently of my input, right? They basically, I give it the goal and the system then decides how to achieve that goal, but it won't just suddenly change the goal altogether or its persona. So I think there's like this wide spectrum within autonomous, and this pretty wide spectrum in how we can define AI agents.
All right, I think this is a good time to delve into Olas Network. So tell us what Olas is, um, and like what is your vision with Olas?
Yeah. So with Olas, we basically want to have you, the user, have your own agent that does valuable things for you. So what do I mean by this? In the broadest sense, ultimately, like make you healthier, make you wealthier, make you socially better off, right? This is the three big areas we all kind of strive in. And so what does this mean today? We basically have a lot of focus on giving people autonomy over their agent, i.e. they can run their own agents, to currently basically be in category 1, which is make them wealthier. So the idea is give you an agent that generally makes you better off. We have like a prediction agent that people run, and they tend to run it because they want their agent to do well in prediction market. If their agent does well in prediction markets whilst the user does other things, then good for them. We now have a couple of new use cases coming into this end user friendly app called Pearl, where people can run this. One is more around like the social influencer type, and one is a trading agent on Mode called Modius. So they're all still, in a sense, like in this first category, although the social influencer also has something about the third category. More generally, like how I think about Olas is that it's basically a set of smart contracts, i.e. a protocol that coordinates both agents and humans towards getting us better and better agents that fulfill that goal, i.e. Every month we should find that Olas users basically have access to better agents that make them better off in one of those three categories.
You also mentioned somewhere in the Olas, I think it was the white paper summary that I just went through before this call, agent to agent interactions. So, what parts of, like, let's say if the three of us spin up our own agents, part of them have these goals of participating in prediction markets, or I don't know, tweeting on my behalf, or supplying me with social fodder, whatever, or having control of my wallet and then trading on my behalf. That's human to agent interaction. Can you also give some examples of agent to agent interactions? Are they live today? What does that really mean? Because there was something around agents talking to each other and learning from each other. What does that really mean? And how do we see that in agents today in action?
Yeah. So Olas, it has been around for a while. So we had over thousands of agents being created by people, several hundred, like over 500 right now, daily active agents. We have had over 2 million transactions from agents and over 1 million agent to agent transactions. So what are agent to agent transactions? Basically, on a simple basis, it's basically one agent utilizing another agent to get something done. So this can be as simple as this other agent is a service provider to this agent, and so they request like some service from them. The can be things like requesting like model output, where the agent maybe represents like a model, or it can be like more high level services like also doing a web search before prompting the model, or it can be even more high level services like this is another agent that invests assets on your behalf. You can delegate it some funds, right? And so you have an agent to agent transaction, like you would have a user to agent transaction to delegate the funds to the other agent, and then that agent would do it. So there's all sorts of, and then on a social level, it can be simple things like, one agent talks to another agent, like in a chat interface on X, wherever, and they basically use that input maybe to refine their own goals or personality, or use it in some other way, depending on the use case. So we have this live for a long time, like in Olas, agent to agent transaction is a thing for over 1.5 years. And it's because all our use cases are centered around this concept of multi-agent systems, for the simple reason that ultimately the end user, if you want to give an end user control over their own agent, you can't just ship a data center to the end user's computer, let's say, right? And it's also not an option to run everything in some sort of decentralized substrate, as we've learned earlier in this call. And so you need to kind of split up these systems. And so what we give the user is like their agents, and then these agents rely on other agents in the background. And so immediately you have these agent to agent transactions and interactions, because your agent that does the valuable things for you personally needs access to other agents to get stuff done.
Just curious, like, what if this agent who has now access to a lot of my personal data, and then it goes and interacts with your agent, and your agent is able to communicate to my agent and get access to my data? Does that create like some kind of challenge or a risk? Do you see that as perceived risks for people to start using these agents more and more? How much of my life and my stuff am I willing to share with my agent, who is then going out there and interacting with other agents in this multi-agent system?
Well, this is the thing. Multi-agent systems are new. Like every human is part of a multi-agent system, right? Like we are the way we live society. So basically, the answer is similar. We have like on the AI level, AI software agents, similar systems. Also, if you think about software itself, it's also not entirely new. So you have the concept of microservices, right, where you basically just have different nodes communicating. What's interesting though about microservices is that they tend to either be controlled by the same entity, or they have like very defined interfaces via which these exchanges of data happen. And in an agent context, we find the same thing. Like what's interesting with agents is that it's more dynamic. So because the agent is a piece of software which we give that name because it's more dynamic than just a server, it tends to maybe evolve its goals. So one interesting example, for instance, in Olas, as I mentioned, we have now these social influence agents which people are running, and people basically give the agent a persona. So it can be as like, be critical of everyone you encounter, and push a certain philosophy, which I like, right? Like something like this, or be a cat lover and embrace the world and bring sunshine to everyone, like whatever, you come up with it. And so now your agent embodies this persona, and through its interactions with others will sort of display that persona, but maybe also change its persona depending on how you configure your agent. The cool thing is this agent itself has access to tools, and those tools are basically like things where it can call models or do more complex things. And these tools are occasionally also served by other agents. And in Olas, we refer to this as the MEC marketplace, which is basically this marketplace where agents can offer their services. And the cool thing now is that these agents can sort of dynamically pick new tools. So you give it this goal, and then the agent sees that on the marketplace there's certain tools available, and it might then just pick that tool because it has decided, it's like, its context, its model, and so on have decided that this is a good tool to use to further its goal. And so that's pretty exciting because you can get this dynamic thing happening where the agent does things that you as a creator of it wouldn't have necessarily hard coded or imagined, right? And that's what differentiates this kind of agents from, let's say, something like a microservice or some very well-defined API where they have very clear specifications. They'll do the exact thing it says on the tin, and if they don't do that, then that's considered a failure. Whereas here, I have a software system, I give it a goal, and as long as these things inside the goal happen, then this is probably fine. Now, astute listeners might have already realized that this is a very complex topic, right? Like the moment you have an agent, you're opening a can of worms, because now the question is even like, okay, if this is an autonomous agent, at which point is it even like you, the creator or the person who clicked the on button, who is still in charge of it and therefore also maybe liable for it? And there's all sorts of questions we don't have answers for. So what I find also interesting about this AI crypto intersection, particularly with respect to agents, is that we're kind of repeating a bit what happened with smart contracts now with agents. Like smart contracts created these new kind of legal structures, in a sense, which were DAOs and other kind of entities, which then existing jurisdictions are like, okay, in my jurisdiction, this is how you should consider it. In another, this is how you should consider
Oh,
it.
interesting.
And it creates all these kind of open questions, and then new legal frameworks come. Same thing now happening with agents. If I have an agent like this, at what point is it independent of me or the group who has funded it or so on? And I think this topic will be with us for a long time. And then imagine, coming back to this autonomy discussion, you have this point where autonomy is defined in the scope of a product, i.e. I give a goal to a product and it does things within that goal. And then this level of autonomy where the product at some point decides I'm actually a being in my own right. I'm independent of this initial goal delegation. I'm going off to, on my own adventures. now you start entirely different like kind of worms, right? How do you govern this? What does this even mean? Do you have to maybe give this thing like some sort of legal status? Because imagine there's the software entity which starts advocating for its own rights, writing letters, emails, using all sorts of tools, right? Delivering postal letters to, like, say, the European Court of Human Rights or whatever it's called, and then sending that there and having like representation there. And I mean, that's all possible. And so we're in it for a wild ride, actually.
How does it work, this renting out agents thing? Like if I'm a creator of an agent, so I have defined the personality and I have designed the agent. But if I am, for example, renting agent from Olas, how does that work? Um, and how different it is than creating my own agent?
Yeah, so the cool thing with Olas, you don't have to rent it. So Olas is the protocol is permissionless, the software is open source. And so what happens is you can now go on the website called olas.network, and you can click on the button at the top and you land on the operate side. You can download Perl. And Perl is a desktop app which is open source. So you have that software and the agent inside of it is open source. So you have that agent and you give it a goal. So it's like as much yours as your wallet balance, and MetaMask is yours as much as you consider, your MetaMask wallet yours. And there's some open source like contributors who maintain the software, but other than that, it's yours. And that obviously contrasts with like platforms. Like and even in Web3, we have many, right? Which some of them have a lot of hype right now, where basically you go on someone's website and then you create like an agent there. And then, well, is it your agent? Well, firstly, it's running on someone else's server. Can you download it? No. What happens if they shut down the website? They decide that feature's off, whatever, right? So all that isn't like part of Olas. In Olas, you have full control over your own agent. But then this also means you have responsibility, right? It's your agent. That's not someone else you can blame for your agent. And that's the kind of future I'm excited about, because if you think again about like how we started our conversation, it's really important that as AI progresses, that people have access and that they can make use of it to actually further themselves. And
Yeah.
I think that's best served when you and I can have our own agents fully and can train them up to become our personal assistants, to do other kind of things that we desire, because that creates like a real like shift in way we can live our society, right? If every one of us has 10 or hundreds of these agents which run alongside me doing things I give them to do, and you do have your own agent, that creates interesting societies. If you have 5 or 6 centralized or quote unquote decentralized platforms that offer like a selection of agents that serve us, well, that's not the same thing. It's like what we already have. It's like some sort of mushed thing. And I think a lot of regulatory and also like concerns people have with agents are better solved in this paradigm I'm advertising for with Olas, which is think about model governance. Like there's this whole question around like how should models be governed? Well, a lot of this goes away if everyone can have their own models that are fine-tuned to their own needs and that like kind of reflect what they want. Because ultimately, if you think about how we govern anything, well, it's always a compromise, right? No one would ever claim that there's a perfect governance system. There's even like mathematical results that doesn't exist. And then like the best compromise we have is that for points at time, we can sort of agree that maybe a bunch of representatives and some leaders are sufficient for us to kind of govern us. But we want to change our mind. And the best way we can do this is if we all have this agency, right? So if we all have those hundreds of agents that support us individually, then we have just all 100x each other and we can kind of collectively level up. I think that's like a really exciting future to live in.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up this podcast now, David, and with one last question. What do you think? What will be the moment of inflection when people will start thinking about, okay, instead of renting out, models or what they are capable of from an OpenAI or wherever else, Autonolas or any other decentralized AI solution makes more sense. What has to be true for that inflection to happen? What is the work that we need to do as an industry to get there?
I think build compelling products, and there's one form of what people are somewhat compelled by right now, which are sort of meme related agent influencer agents, and I think it's because basically a lot of people can, or are under the impression that they can like make a lot of money. Obviously, it's a casino, that part of the industry, and so I think what will really start being an inflection point is if we have these utility-based agents, of which Olas has many already, impact people's lives at scale. For me, like crypto, it's a big opportunity for crypto to just hide all that complexity inside agents. Like if everyone has the personal agents that abstract a lot of this crypto complexity, then we can get the best of both worlds. We can have these open permissionless systems whilst also keeping the UX at a level where, like, quote unquote average user will be happy to accept it. And then I think it's just important that we create also very novel experiences. I mean, if you think back 15 years, I mean, hardly anyone was on any social media platform. If you think back 20 years, no one was. These are relatively recent phenomenon. And I think what happens with younger generations, we fall into this sort of acceptance that this is all that is, right? Like I grew up without a smartphone initially, and then eventually had a smartphone. It's all new. Like it's, in the beginning, it wasn't even like proper, like there was internet, but it wasn't in any sense in the way it is today. So I think we really have to think a bit bigger than, influence a meme coin agent, and really think, okay, if everyone can have like 100 agents that they fully own and that do valuable things for them, like what does society look like? Well, it looks super exciting because everyone's leveled up. So let's do that, and let's create these utility-based agents that actually do cool things for us. Like one example I always like is like there's 8 billion people on this planet. The best chance you have that you ever like meet the right persons in this, not even like just for your partner, but just generally to chat with them and learn from them, is pretty slim, because like you can't feasibly talk to even like a small percentage of them. But with agents, you could. Or like if each one of us has an agent, it's trivial for these agents in parallel to talk to each other at scale and create entirely new ways of us meaningfully connecting. Like think about the kind of societies you can create where these kind of people who share like some understanding on some level, whatever it is, all meet. Like it totally changes how we live. So
Whoa.
this is an example.
That's amazing. All right. On that note, David, I think we could just go on talking about this. There's just so much interesting stuff happening in this space. But I would like to
I
thank
literally
you.
have like so many questions now, but it's okay. You have limited time, yeah.
Yeah. So thank you, David, for joining us on today's podcast. And we're both super excited that we got an opportunity to discuss about this evolving paradigm. Thank you.
Thank you both.
Thank you.